ever feel like you're living in a workplace sitcom, you've probably heard the lines, Gen Z job hops so much they probably have their resignation letter on speed dial, or good luck getting a millennial to use any tech made after 2015. Do these greatest hits from the office rumor mill sound familiar? But what if I told you the workplace gossip network has it all wrong? What if these are just outdated myths? These stereotypes, as harmless as they might seem, over lukewarm coffee, are creating real invisible barriers at work. They sow mistrust, stifle collaboration, and waste incredible human potential. In fact, a Q1 2025 report from the Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM, found that about 1 in 3 employees say generational differences contribute to the incivility they experience at work. That means there's a good chance you or your colleagues are missing out on powerful connections simply because of a tired assumption. Today, we're going into full-on myth-busting mode. We're going to fact-check the top 5 most persistent myths about Gen Z and millennials in the workplace, armed with hard data and some surprising truths. Are you ready to call bluff on the stereotypes and see your colleagues in a whole new light? Hit that subscribe button for GenShift because you won't want to miss this workplace fact-check. Myth hash 1, Gen Z is disloyal and allergic to commitment. Let's start with the big one, the myth that paints an entire generation as professional wanderers with zero loyalty. The narrative goes that Gen Z employees treat jobs like fashion trends exciting for a season, but quickly discarded for the next new thing. And on the surface, the numbers seem to back this up. One Resume Lab report found that a staggering 83% of Gen Z workers actually consider themselves to be job hoppers. A 2024 Bankrate survey added fuel to the fire, revealing that 39% of Gen Z plan to resign within the next year. So case closed, right? They're disloyal. Well, not so fast. When you stop looking at what they're doing and start asking why a completely different picture emerges. This isn't about a character flaw. It's a strategic response to the world they've inherited. First, let's talk about the economy. For the 3rd year in a row, Deloitte reports that the cost of living is the #1 concern for Gen Z. In an economic climate where significant pay raises within a company are rare, switching jobs is often the single most effective way to secure a meaningful salary increase. A 2024 Gallup analysis confirms that pay and benefits is the top reason people leave their jobs, a sentiment shared by both Gen Z and millennials. So what looks like disloyalty is often just smart financial pragmatism. But it's much deeper than money. This is a generation that puts its labor where its values are. According to Deloitte's 2024 global survey, an incredible 44% of Gen Z have rejected an employer because it clashed with their personal ethics, a figure closely followed by 40% of millennials. They are walking away from organizations that don't support their well-being, have a negative environmental impact, or lack genuine inclusivity. In fact, a staggering 75% of Gen Z employees have left jobs for mental health reasons compared to 60% of millennials, showing just how non-negotiable this has become. Finally, they are running toward growth. A study by Forage found that 67% of Gen Z want to work for companies where they can learn skills to advance their careers, and it remains a top 3 reason for choosing an employer for both them and their millennial counterparts. If they feel they're stagnating, they will seek development opportunities elsewhere. This all points to a fundamental rewriting of the employer-employee contract. Their loyalty is not given freely. It is earned every single day through fair pay, real growth opportunities, and a culture that respects their well-being and values. To call them disloyal is to judge them by the rules of a game they are no longer playing. Myth hash 2, millennials are tech laggards left in Gen Z's digital dust. All right, let's tackle the stereotype that portrays millennials as digital dinosaurs fumbling with their smartphones while their Gen Z colleagues effortlessly glide through the digital universe. It's a compelling image, but it's almost entirely fiction. Let's rewind the clock. Who brought the modern digital workplace into existence? Millennials. They were the generation that came of age with the explosion of the internet. They normalized instant messaging, pioneered the use of social media for professional networking, and championed the collaborative cloud-based tools like Google Drive and Slack that are now the backbone of most modern companies. They aren't digital immigrants who reluctantly got a passport. They were the original settlers of this digital frontier. But perhaps the most powerful piece of evidence debunking this myth comes from the most cutting-edge technology of all, generative AI. You'd assume Gen Z would be light years ahead, right? Wrong. According to Deloitte's 2025 data, the adoption rates are nearly identical. 57% of Gen Z use Gen AI in their daily work, and so do 56% of millennials. This single statistic makes the laggard claim fall apart. When it comes to adopting the most transformative professional tool of our time, there is virtually no generational gap. So where does the myth come from? It comes from confusing two very different things: technological competence and cultural fluency. Tech competence is the ability to use technology to get a job done effectively. As the Gen AI data shows, millennials have this in spades. Cultural fluency is the intuitive grasp of the trends, memes, and communication styles of the very newest platforms like TikTok. Gen Z, having grown up on these platforms, naturally leads here. The mistake happens when a manager sees a millennial who doesn't understand a niche TikTok reference and incorrectly assumes they also can't master a complex data analytics platform. It's like judging a brilliant novelist's command of language based on whether they know the latest slang. They are speaking different digital dialects, but they are all fluent. In fact, this positions millennials perfectly as a bridge generation. They have the deep-seated professional tech skills to mentor older colleagues while being close enough in age and mindset to learn and adapt to emerging trends from Gen Z, creating a powerful two-way street of learning through practices like reverse mentoring. Myth #3: Gen Z is entitled and overly demanding. This myth paints Gen Z as a generation of divas constantly demanding feedback, promotions, and special treatment. They're seen as wanting trophies just for showing up. But when we dig into what they're actually asking for, it looks less like entitlement and more like a high-performance mindset that could actually be a massive asset. Let's start with their famous need for feedback. The data is clear they crave it. One report noted that 66% of Gen Z employees want feedback from their supervisor at least every few weeks just to stay in their job. This is often framed as being needy, but let's reframe it. This is a generation that grew up in highly responsive digital environments. In a video game, you get instant feedback on your performance. On social media, you get immediate metrics on your posts. They are hardwired for a world with clear rules, real-time data, and transparent paths to the next level. When they come into a workplace and ask, "How am I doing?" or "What's the clear path to promotion?" they aren't being demanding. They're asking for the rule book so they can play the game effectively for the company. They are trying to close the gap between effort and outcome as efficiently as possible. A 2024 Gallup poll backs this up, showing Gen Z has a significant positive momentum, an 8-point increase in reports of receiving meaningful feedback, suggesting that when they get it, they respond well. Their vocalness about mental health and work-life balance is another area often mislabeled as entitlement, but are these desires unique to Gen Z? Of course not. A healthy work-life balance and psychological safety are things employees of all generations want. The difference is that Gen Z is the first generation to enter the workforce, treating these as standard, non-negotiable conditions of employment, not as perks to be earned after a decade of paying your dues. They are making the implicit desires of the entire workforce explicit. This reveals their true role in the modern workplace. By refusing to accept ambiguity, inconsistent management, or cultures that harm their well-being, Gen Z is inadvertently acting as an organizational catalyst. They are forcing companies to build better systems. The clear career paths they demand are the same paths that help retain millennials. The frequent feedback they seek is the same feedback that improves performance for Gen X. Their insistence on a healthy culture benefits everyone. They aren't breaking the system, they're exposing the cracks so it can be rebuilt stronger. What looks like a problem is actually a solution in disguise. Of these first three myths, which one did you believe the most? Or is there another misconception about Gen Z or millennials that you've since realized was off the mark? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We want to hear all the different perspectives. Myth #4: millennials are hustle culture workaholics. For years, the millennial stereotype was the hustlepreneur, glued to their email, working late and turning every hobby into a side gig. They were seen as the generation that lived to work. There's a kernel of truth to where this came from, but holding on to this stereotype today is like using a map from 2015 to navigate a city. In 2025, the landscape has completely changed. The millennial workaholic phase wasn't an identity, it was largely a trauma response. This generation graduated into the economic wreckage of the dot-com bust and the 2008 Great Recession. They entered a hyper-competitive job market defined by scarcity and instability. The hustle culture that emerged wasn't a lifestyle choice, it was a survival strategy. Working long hours and being constantly available felt necessary to prove their worth and hang on to a job. But this came at a tremendous cost. The data on millennial burnout is staggering. A recent AFLAC report found that 66% of millennials experience moderate to high levels of burnout, a rate significantly higher than any other generation. For comparison, that figure is 60% for Gen X and 56% for Gen Z. Millennials are often caught in a perfect storm, juggling the growing demands of their careers with caregiving for both children and aging parents, all while carrying the scars of multiple economic downturns. The pandemic, however, served as a collective breaking point. It forced a massive reevaluation of what work should be. Having experienced the peak of hustle culture and its damaging effects, many millennials are now leading the charge away from it. They are actively rejecting the always-on mentality and are now championing the very things Gen Z also demands: better work-life balance, stronger mental health support, and more flexibility. They didn't just adopt these values, they learned them the hard way through the painful experience of burnout. This represents a clear evolution. The millennial workforce has shifted from a live-to-work mindset born of anxiety to a work-to-live-well philosophy born of experience. Any manager who still sees their millennial employees as tireless workhorses who thrive on 60-hour weeks is operating on an obsolete stereotype. They are not the same employees they were a decade ago, and trying to manage them as such is a direct path to disengagement and turnover. Myth #5: Gen Z and millennials are always at war. This is the ultimate workplace myth, the idea of a constant simmering conflict between Gen Z and millennials. The media loves to frame it as a battle of skinny jeans versus baggy pants side parts versus middle parts, and avocado toast versus, well, also avocado toast. But this narrative of a generational war is largely a fiction, a convenient and clickable story that ignores the overwhelming evidence of their alignment. When you look past the superficial differences, you find a powerful alliance built on a foundation of shared core values. Deloitte's comprehensive 2024 global survey makes this crystal clear. For both Gen Z and millennials, work-life balance is the #1 priority when choosing an employer. For nearly 9 out of 10 people in both generations, having a sense of purpose is critical to their job satisfaction. Both generations are demanding more flexibility and better mental health support, and both are willing to reject employers who don't align with their ethical values. They are fundamentally on the same page about what makes a good job and a good life. So if they agree on all the big things, where does the perceived friction come from? It mostly stems from 2 places. First, surface level differences in communication styles. A millennial might write a formal email while a Gen Z colleague might send a quick emoji-filled Slack message. This can lead to misinterpretation, but it's a conflict of style, not of substance. The second and more corrosive source of conflict is the weaponization of the very stereotypes we've been debunking. The conflict isn't actually Gen Z versus millennial, it's stereotype versus person. When a manager views a Gen Z employee's question as entitlement instead of a quest for clarity, they create conflict. When a millennial dismisses a Gen Z colleague's communication style as unprofessional, they create conflict. The problem isn't the people. It's the biased lens through which they are viewed. This means the entire narrative of a generational divide is often a massive leadership failure. Blaming team dysfunction on generational differences is a convenient excuse that masks the real issues: a lack of clear communication standards, a failure to actively dismantle stereotypes, and an unwillingness to manage people as individuals rather than as generational caricatures. When these artificial barriers are removed, the combination of millennial experience and Gen Z's digital nativity doesn't create conflict. It creates a collaborative superpower, an engine for innovation that can propel a company forward. Conclusion. So there you have it, 5 of the most common workplace myths officially debunked. From loyalty and tech skills to entitlement and burnout, the stories we tell ourselves about Gen Z and Millennials often have little to do with reality. Gen Z's disloyalty is a strategic quest for value and growth. Millennials aren't tech laggards, they're tech pioneers adapting to new tools. What looks like entitlement is a drive for clarity, and the hustle culture workaholic has evolved into a champion for well-being. Most importantly, the idea that they are at war is a fiction. Instead, they are allies united by a shared desire for a more flexible, purposeful, and humane way of working. Dismantling these stereotypes does more than just make us feel better, it unlocks real potential. It allows us to see our colleagues for their individual strengths, not their birth year. The path forward isn't about creating different rules for different generations. It's about building a single, modern, human-centric culture that delivers what the data shows everyone wants: respect, growth, flexibility, and purpose. The most successful organizations of the future will be post-generational. They will stop managing by stereotype and start leading by individual. After all, understanding is the most powerful bridge we can build. What myth were you most surprised to see debunked? Or do you have a funny story about a generational misunderstanding at work? Drop your laugh or you'll cry moments in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to GenShift. We'll keep busting myths and uncovering the secrets to building a workplace where everyone can thrive.